Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Welcome to another episode of Capitol Preview, a show where we question the senators and House members of the Iowa State Capitol about issues that are important to them and issues that are important to you. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Show. Our guest today is Senator Rob Taylor, Republican from West Des Moines, District 44. Rob, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is the time of year you're probably anxious for everything to shut down a little bit.
It's the most unpredictable time of the year. We could be done in a week, and it might be June 30th before we're done.
This is kind of instead of a red meat interview, this is more of a conversation because
Sure.
we like to find out what Rob Taylor's thinking and what he's thinking is happening up at the state capitol. So the first one, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit, when do you anticipate, we're sitting here at the last week in April, when do you anticipate this is going to be closed?
I would certainly like to see it close to being wrapped up by the end of this week, but as you know, the House and Senate have been fairly far apart on a tax reform plan. We just are setting our own targets in the House and the Senate rather than joint targets like we've done previously. So as long as everyone's getting along at the Capitol this week, and as long as the minority party doesn't caucus for long periods of time between bills, we should be done this week. But the likelihood of both of those not occurring is pretty likely.
From your lips to God's ears, I hope so. Where do you sit, or where do we sit with tax reform this year? And what do you think the impact of the proposed tax bill has on the rest of the budget?
Well, I've kind of been a naysayer within my own party caucus on doing tax reform this year for a couple of reasons. I think that there's a number of committee bills right now, specifically our budget bills, that we've had to make tremendous cuts over the last 3 or 4 years, and I've been in now for the 6th year. And I would say a number of our budgets are bare-bone budgets. RIF is one, for example, that we've deferred maintenance on a lot of state buildings and state projects for a number of years. Health and Human Services is a budget that I set on as well, and we have cut that substantially over the last 4 years specifically. And Judiciary is also running pretty lean. So I have been somewhat of a naysayer on tax cuts this year, specifically because I think that we are at a point in time where any further cuts or lack of additional funding in the future may potentially impact essential services to our constituents. And I think that my constituents, I think, expect that we fund essential services properly over refunding them a substantial sum of money, $1.3 billion over the next 3 to 4 years, and then have to come back around 3 or 4 years from now and ask them for additional resources. So I've been a skeptic of the plan, but I'm listening with an open mind.
Yeah. Very good. One of the bills that was assigned to you this year in appropriations was TIF reform bill. What are your thoughts on the bill, and where do you think it's going to go? Because TIF is kind of, and maybe you might want to explain TIF to our viewers a little bit, because it's kind of a complicated concept for taxes.
We could do a whole show on tax increment financing.
We absolutely could. But just in a nutshell, give us kind of what the purpose of TIF
in a nutshell, it's one of the tools that municipal governments have to incentivize organizations to their area, and it's an additional resource that can be utilized in some circumstances to help entice a deal. And I'm a proponent of TIF when used properly. There's been a couple of communities in the state of Iowa that have TIF'd their entire city or TIF'd their entire district that I think is inappropriate. Waukee, West Des Moines, and Clive, the areas that I represent, have, in my opinion, have never misused TIF. But it's one of those things where you've got a couple bad actors that when we get up to the Capitol, we try and set policies in place to prevent bad actors from acting badly. And unfortunately, sometimes it punishes the good actors. So the bill being assigned to me this year actually was a good thing, in the fact that it allowed us to have robust discussions with our municipal governments, with our county boards of supervisors, for example. I think the day that we had that TIF subcommittee meeting in the back of the Iowa House lounge, I think it was a packed house. But we listened to everyone. I listened to everyone. My subcommittee also did as well. And I think the purpose of the TIF, the purpose of that TIF subcommittee was to get input from the community and get input from us as to what our concerns are. It is not my intention ever to get rid of TIF. I think it's a great tool in your toolbox. But from a budgetary standpoint, because I sit on the Appropriations Committee, when we're forecasting our budgets from year to year, I do think that it's really important that we have some sort of an idea as to what the expectations are from the community and what our expectations are on how to utilize that TIF money appropriately. So if for no other reason than a good exercise in communication, I loved being the chair of that TIF bill. Where it stands right now, I don't know, but we continue to have continued communication with our community, and I think we're communicating, and I'm communicating with those that are concerned about the elimination of TIF. That's not my intention at all. It's just a matter of what do we need to do to reform it or put limits on it so that it's there for the long haul for us to be able to use for years to come.
So it was passed over to the House, right? The TIF bill?
The TIF bill came out of the Appropriations Committee.
Right.
We had a subcommittee meeting, which is 2 majority members and a minority member.
Right.
And we had a robust discussion, but at this point in time, I've still not signed off onto that to move it to full committee.
Got it. Okay. Very good. Rob, now that you've announced your legislative retirement after 3 terms, is there any legislation that you've spearheaded that you're particularly proud of?
There's a couple of bills that I've ran in the last few years that I'm particularly proud of. One of which is a meningitis immunization vaccine bill that I ran, I think 2 years ago, that required immunizations of meningitis in junior high and high school. It was a controversial bill at the time because we have a number of people that don't think that they should be mandated to vaccinate their children. I disagree with that. I think that if they're in a public school or in a public setting, I think that we have a certain responsibility. So I bucked my own party and some of my more further to the right Republicans to make sure that we worked in a bipartisan way to get that through. I told my party that it was not a mandate, that it was a requirement because it does have religious and medical exemptions. So I made sure that that stayed in place, so if there was a reason that a parent felt as though their child should not be immunized, that they had a discussion with their doctor so that there's a full understanding from both sides as to why or why not that child should be immunized.
How much do you think DC politics, it seems particularly bad right now, affects the Iowa House or the Iowa State House, both parties?
Well,
both houses.
Up until recently, I wouldn't say that it affected it to the degree that I see now. DC politics affects us when they can get nothing done in DC, because a lot of those budgets, for example, education is one that comes to mind, transportation is another that comes to mind, in which there's large sums of money that come back from the federal government as long as we're compliant with federal regulations to help us fund our programs here. And when they can't get anything done in DC, and House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats don't talk, and the president can be an obstacle at times, regardless of who the president is.
Right.
The less that we get done at the DC level, the less likely it is for us to be able to put together a predictable budget for our constituents in the future. And one of the things that we get a lot of guff on many times is education. Well, a lot of our education budget comes from federal government, in the form of matching funds. And if we don't know what is coming back from the federal government, we don't know how to put our budget together. Another one that comes up is Health and Human Services. And I mean, between Health and Human Services, education, and state wages and benefits, that's 90% of our state budget. So when we don't see what's happening in DC as far as policy and budget, and it's not predictable at that level, it certainly makes our jobs very difficult to try and make a predictable yet sustainable budget for our constituents. So it can be frustrating, and it is an obstacle right now. But the good news is at the state level, we get along about 85% of the time, in my opinion, between Democrats and Republicans, which I think is more than probably is what's happening in DC right now.
I absolutely agree. I think the State House does a great job. There's some blips here and there, but
Sure.
I mean, there is going to be in any organization.
Absolutely.
You know, we're running out of time, but there's a couple of these that I definitely want to get into. What are your thoughts on a potential trade war, because it potentially affects Iowa with China, and how do you think that will affect Iowa?
I think I'm very concerned about a potential trade war, but just over the weekend there was some signs that President Trump's line in the sand may be working with North Korea and specifically China, in which we've taken a strong position, and I would call it an absolute position, in which now there's at least a set down of some negotiations. But I would really hate for our agricultural economy for us to go into a full-fledged trade war. I think that would potentially be devastating to Iowa.
And you say that with some validity because you grew up on a farm,
I
so
did.
you understand what the farm problems are. You know,
Yeah.
they're always struggling anyway, and then to get one more punch in the eye would.
Yeah, commodity prices being low right now, coupled with an uncertainty to foreign economies like China, in which a great deal of our soybeans, our corn, and 25% of our pork is exported to China specifically. That could be a devastating blow to our fragile agrarian economy right now.
We're swiftly running out of time,
Sure.
but I want to get this question in. What are you going to do with all your extra time? And
All my extra
And we
time.
know you don't have any. But what are you going to do with your extra time when you leave the legislature and go back to your business?
Sure. Well, I have a training and consulting business that I'll be getting back to. My wife and I are also starting a whiskey and bourbon distillery. We bought an old winery in southern Iowa that we're converting right now. And then I have a beekeeping business. So between those three right now, I think I'm going to have plenty of things to do. But it has been a pleasure for the last 6 years to serve the people of District 44. And I think the only thing that I would miss more than anything is I really like a diversified job description, you know, from beekeeper to business owner to consultant to legislator. You wear a number of different hats, but I like that. But you wear too many hats and then you become ineffective. And I 3 businesses right now. It's time to hang up my hat and let someone else lead the District of 44. And it's been my pleasure. And I know that there's a number of good candidates that are running for a replacement.
Well, you've always been a straight shooter, and I appreciate that. I mean, your word is your bond, and you didn't have to go along to get along. You had your own way of thinking, and I think the people of Dallas County appreciated that, District 44. So,
Thank you, Bill.
So we're going to miss you in the state legislature, but it sounds like you're going to be around, and
I'll be around.
You got a lot of stuff to do. So I appreciate you tuning in to Iowa. Capitol Preview, Capitol Preview, and to listen to our guests, Representative Rob Taylor from District 44 in West Des Moines. So, Rob, I appreciate you very much
Thank you, Bill.
coming in here this morning. All right, well, thank you, and tune into another episode of Capitol Preview.